The first shots of the Third World War were not fired across an ocean or above a disputed island chain. They were fired in the dust, heat, and radio static of the Sonoran Desert. For years, the U.S. Mexico border had been a zone of managed tension. Smuggling corridors, drone surveillance, joint task forces, and quiet intelligence sharing held the illusion of control. Publicly, both governments spoke of cooperation. Privately, the relationship had been eroding under pressure from cartel militarization, energy disputes in the Gulf of Mexico, and a collapsing regional security balance in Central America. At 4:17 local time on June 3rd, that balance finally broke. A U.S. Border Patrol forward operating base near Sasa Bay, Arizona, designated FOB Iron Mesa, registered a sudden loss of drone telemetry. 3 MQ-27 surveillance drones dropped off the network within 12 seconds. Seconds later, seismic sensors detected concussive impacts south of the fence line. The initial report described it as a cartel ambush. That assessment lasted exactly 9 minutes. At 4:29, a fourth explosion struck the perimeter wall itself. Not an IED, a shaped charge. By 4:31, Iron Mesa was under sustained fire from 120mm mortars. This was not cartel activity. By sunrise, 7 U.S. personnel were dead. 2 armored vehicles burned inside the wire. The attackers withdrew in coordinated waves, covered by electronic jamming that blinded local ISR assets. Their retreat paths crossed not into wilderness, but onto a paved road network maintained by the Mexican federal government. The phrase used in the first classified briefing at Northern Command was simple and devastating. State-level capability confirmed. In Mexico City, the narrative was already diverging. At 8 o'clock, the Secretariat of National Defense released a statement condemning armed extremists operating independently near the border and denied any involvement by Mexican forces. Social media inside Mexico told a different story. Videos filmed from nearby villages showed uniformed troops moving with heavy equipment hours before the attack. The patches were blurred, the vehicles unmarked, but the discipline was unmistakable. Within 12 hours, U.S. signals intelligence intercepted encrypted communications linking the attackers to the 3rd Rapid Reaction Brigade of the Mexican Army. The White House Situation Room convened at 11:40 Eastern Time. The president did not speak at first. The screen showed satellite imagery, casualty lists, and a blinking red indicator labeled Escalation Risk, Southcom/Northcom interface. The Joint Chiefs presented 3 options: diplomatic protest and reinforcement, limited cross-border pursuit, precision strikes on identified staging areas. The 4th option, full retaliation, was not spoken aloud. At 14:05, the president authorized option 2. Operation Copper Shield began without a press release. By nightfall, U.S. Army Rangers crossed the border under blackout conditions, targeting what intelligence described as non-attributable hostile formations. The first firefight occurred near Altar, Sonora. It lasted 6 minutes. When it ended, 12 Mexican soldiers lay dead. One was an officer carrying orders signed by a regional commander. At 2:10 on June 4th, Mexico's president addressed the nation. "Mexico has been violated," he said. "Foreign troops have crossed our sovereign territory. This aggression will not go unanswered." The word war was not used. In Washington, the response was equally measured and equally hollow. "The United States acted in self-defense," the Secretary of Defense stated. "We seek de-escalation." Behind closed doors, U.S. Cyber Command elevated readiness levels. Southcom naval assets in the Gulf were ordered to disperse. NORAD increased radar coverage along the southern vector, a direction it had never been designed to prioritize. At 6:44, the first Mexican naval movement was detected. For missile-capable patrol vessels left Veracruz under radio silence, heading north into the Gulf of Mexico. Simultaneously, Mexican Air Force radar sites along the eastern coast switched to wartime modes. American analysts noted something disturbing. The activation patterns matched those used in joint exercises with foreign advisors years earlier. This was not improvisation. At 9:12, an American P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft was locked by fire control radar over international waters. The crew reported the tone. The recording would later be played in congressional hearings. At 9:14, a surface-to-air missile launched. It missed, deliberately, Analysts would later conclude. A warning shot. The Poseidon returned to base. The incident was logged. No response was authorized. That restraint would last less than 24 hours. On June 5th, at 3:50, coordinated cyber attacks struck power substations in southern Texas. Brownsville went dark. Corpus Christi followed. Port operations halted. Oil futures spiked globally within minutes. At 4:03, U.S. Cyber Command traced the intrusion to servers previously linked to Mexican military intelligence, with code fragments unmistakably written by a third party. The southern fault line had cracked open. By dawn, armored units on both sides of the border were moving into forward positions. Fighter squadrons were placed on strip alert. Civilian flights over northern Mexico were quietly rerouted. No declarations were made. No flags were raised. But every soldier, sailor, and pilot involved understood the truth. This was no longer an incident. This was the opening phase, and it would not remain regional for long. By June 6th, the illusion of containment had collapsed. At 1:20 local time, the U.S. Navy destroyer USS Truxtun, operating in the western Gulf of Mexico, detected multiple fast-moving surface contacts departing Mexican territorial waters. Their profiles matched the patrol vessels that had left Veracruz 48 hours earlier. The Truxtun's orders were explicit: shadow, record, do not engage. At 1:47, Mexican coastal radar activated targeting illumination. The Truxtun's Combat Information Center logged it as hostile intent. The captain requested clarification from Fleet Command. The response came 9 minutes later. Maintain course. Weapons tight. At 2:03, a supersonic anti-ship missile broke the horizon. The first interceptor destroyed it at altitude. The second missile flew lower, skimming the sea. It struck the Truxtun's aft section, detonating near the helicopter hangar. The ship did not sink, but the fire burned uncontrolled for 37 minutes. 23 sailors were killed. 38 were wounded. For the first time, an American warship had been hit by a Mexican missile. At 2:58, U.S. Southern Command declared condition red south. Carrier Strike Group 5, centered on the USS Theodore Roosevelt, was ordered into the Gulf. The decision bypassed Congress entirely. In Mexico City, the news was framed differently. State television announced that Mexican naval forces had repelled an unidentified foreign vessel violating security exclusion zones. The footage showed smoke on the horizon, no wreckage, no coordinates. Crowds gathered outside the National Palace chanting Defensa Nacional. The president did not appear. At 6:40, American aircraft crossed the border openly for the first time. F-35s launched from Texas bases struck radar installations near Tampico and Matamoros. The strikes were precise, surgical, and devastating. Mexican air defense crews had less than 90 seconds of warning. Most systems were destroyed before they could fire. Mexico responded within the hour. At 7:55, short-range ballistic missiles launched from mobile platforms in Nuevo Leon. Their targets were U.S. logistics hubs near Laredo and McAllen. Patriot batteries intercepted most of them. 2 warheads struck open ground. One hit a fuel storage area. The explosion was visible from space. Civilian traffic along the border ceased entirely. Millions attempted to flee north and south simultaneously. Communications failed under the strain. The border, once a line, became a vacuum. By June 7th, the conflict had expanded vertically. Mexican Air Force squadrons attempted to challenge U.S. air dominance over northern Mexico. They were outmatched. Within 12 hours, half of Mexico's operational fighter fleet was destroyed on the ground or in the air. American losses were minimal until 1822. A U.S. B-21 bomber returning from a strike mission over the Gulf was hit by an unknown system. It vanished from radar. No wreckage was recovered. Intelligence analysts concluded the missile was not Mexican in origin. That conclusion never reached the public. Instead, the White House addressed the nation. The United States is under coordinated attack, the president said. We will respond decisively. At 22:10, Operation Iron Divide commenced. U.S. ground forces crossed the border at multiple points, not in raids, but in columns. Armored brigades pushed toward Monterrey and Hermosillo. The objective was not occupation, but neutralization, destroy command nodes, missile units, and airfields. Resistance was heavier than expected. Mexican forces fought with discipline and modern equipment. Their communications were resilient. Their movements anticipated American advances. It became clear that Mexico had prepared for this war far longer than Washington had believed. On June 8th, the first mass casualty event occurred. A U.S. mechanized battalion advancing near Ciudad Victoria was struck by coordinated artillery and drone swarms. Autonomous loitering munitions overwhelmed air defenses. When the smoke cleared, 112 American soldiers were dead. The footage leaked within hours. Across the world, markets crashed. The peso collapsed. The dollar surged, then wavered. Oil prices spiked beyond historic limits as Gulf shipping lanes emptied. At the United Nations, emergency sessions dissolved into accusation. No resolutions passed. No mediators were accepted. At 3 o'clock on June 9th, U.S. Cyber Command executed a full-spectrum digital strike against Mexican infrastructure. Banking systems froze. Air traffic control failed. Power grids flickered. Mexico responded by shutting the Panama Canal through cyber interference and proxy actions. Global trade stalled overnight. What had begun as a border clash was now systemic. Inside the Pentagon, planners quietly updated the conflict designation. This was no longer a regional war. It was a continental front. And beyond it, other powers were watching, calculating timelines, stockpiles, and opportunities. The Third World War had not announced itself, but it had unmistakably begun. By June 10th, the war had outgrown its name. What analysts once called the U.S. Mexico conflict was now referred to inside NATO briefings as the North American theater. The shift in language reflected a deeper truth. The fighting was no longer defined by borders, but by systems, energy, trade, satellites, alliances, all unraveling simultaneously. At 5:30 Eastern Time, U.S. Space Command reported multiple anomalies in low Earth orbit. 3 commercial communication satellites servicing North America lost orientation control within minutes of each other. No debris was detected. The cause was deliberate interference. At 6:12, Russia and China jointly called for an emergency UN ceasefire, one that explicitly demanded the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Mexican territory. The proposal failed within the hour. The message, however, was received. At 8 o'clock, NORAD elevated its alert posture to levels not seen since 1983. In northern Mexico, U.S. advances slowed to a crawl. Supply lines were under constant drone harassment. Civilian infrastructure had collapsed, but resistance had not. Mexican units, now operating in decentralized cells, abandoned conventional formations. The war shifted from maneuver to attrition. Then the Gulf ignited again. On June 11th at 2:18, multiple anti-ship missiles launched simultaneously from unknown platforms in the southern Gulf of Mexico. Their trajectories were complex, evasive, and coordinated beyond Mexico's known capabilities. The targets were oil infrastructure. 2 offshore platforms were destroyed. A third burned uncontrollably for days. Shipping insurers withdrew coverage immediately. The Gulf effectively closed. Within hours, the global economy entered freefall. In response, the United States expanded its target list. At 14:40, long-range strikes hit command facilities deep inside central Mexico. Some were known military sites. Others were dual-use. Collateral damage was extensive. Civilian casualties climbed into the thousands. The images spread faster than any official statement could contain them. At 1900 hours, Mexico's president disappeared from public view. At 1943, a recorded address aired on all remaining national channels. "We are no longer fighting alone," the voice said. An attack on Mexico is an attack on the global south. Within minutes, cyber attacks surged worldwide. European rail systems halted. Asian stock exchanges suspended trading. Financial networks fragmented into regional islands. The war had gone global, not through declarations, but through interdependence. At 3 o'clock on June 12th, the event later called Black Meridian occurred. A high-altitude detonation over the central United States triggered widespread electromagnetic disruption. It was not nuclear in yield, but nuclear in implication. Power grids failed across 5 states. Military bases shifted to backup systems. Early warning radars lit up with false positives. For 11 minutes, U.S. command authorities believed a strategic exchange was imminent. Launch crews entered final readiness. Keys were turned. Orders were drafted, then halted. No nation claimed responsibility. That ambiguity was the most dangerous weapon of all. By June 13th, American casualties exceeded 4,000. Mexican losses were far higher. Refugee flows destabilized Central America entirely. Armed groups seized territory vacated by collapsing governments. South America mobilized defensively. Canada quietly fortified its southern border. The world was fracturing into armed regions. Inside the White House bunker, a final assessment was delivered. The conflict can no longer be controlled, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said. Every action now increases the probability of strategic escalation. The president authorized back-channel negotiations through neutral states. Messages were sent. Responses came slowly, fragmented, conditional, distrustful. On June 15th, after 12 days of continuous escalation, the fighting did not stop. It simply exhausted itself. Missile stockpiles ran low. Aircraft required maintenance that could not be completed. Networks were degraded beyond immediate repair. Command structures on all sides operated on delay and assumption rather than certainty. A de facto pause settled over the continent. No ceasefire was signed. No victory declared. The border remained crossed. The Gulf remained closed. The satellites remained broken. Historians would later argue about when the Third World War truly began. Some would point to the first mortar strike in the desert. Others to the first missile at sea. Many would say it began when systems failed faster than diplomacy could respond. What none would dispute was this: the war did not end. It simply entered a new phase. A colder one. A quieter one. And far more dangerous than before. Because the world had learned something irreversible. That modern war does not need intent. Only momentum. And once unleashed, momentum does not ask permission to stop.